Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sirhan on X on this 4th of November, 2025, coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. Tonight is what I like to call a super show where I focus on one subject and of historical significance. This one is a case of the sport of boxing and one of the premier rivalries. I'll get to that here in a second. Just a brief introduction of what I do for something like this. One topic only. I devote it to that particular situation. And that's why I call it the Super Show, and that's what's going to happen here tonight. Yes, I'm aware about the NFL trade deadline. I will touch on that when I go back to my normal routine tomorrow night. But tonight is of historical significance because the greatest rivalry post Ali Frazier concluded 30 years ago tonight at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. It was the trilogy that concluded between the two standouts of the early 90s, Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe, who engaged in a trilogy that like none other in the early 90s, and it wrapped up 30 years ago tonight. For this particular segment, I'm going to touch on how we got to the trilogy, touch on the first two fights, dig deeper into the third fight because there's a lot of chaos before, during, and after, and what happened after the two fighters after it was done. It will surprise you what happened with the two guys after it was said and done because you would think it would be something totally different. But I'm going to get right down to it. After James Buster Douglas shocked Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield beat Buster Douglas to win the heavyweight championship. Heavyweight division was starting to get sizzling hot, and Evander Holyfield was looking for a marquee opponent. Of course, after he beats Buster Douglas to win the title, he fights 40-somethings George Foreman and Larry Holmes, takes them to distance, and has an unexpected life and death struggle with Burt Cooper, who was a last-minute replacement for Mike Tyson after Mike Tyson fakes a rib injury and winds up in prison. And after the wins over Foreman and Holmes, there was a question as to whether or not this guy was a legitimate heavyweight champion and whether the guy can compete with heavyweights, because he was taking 40-somethings the distance. Of course, George Foreman and Larry Holmes were not ordinary 40-somethings. You're talking about two of the 10 greatest heavyweights to ever step foot in the boxing ring and lace up the gloves. And of course, Foreman's comeback was well chronicled. Larry Holmes had a respectable comeback, who got a title shot after shocking Ray Mercer. So everyone acted like he was supposed to overwhelm Foreman and Holmes, who were 40-somethings. But people didn't see the big picture because both fighters had sustainable comebacks going to their respective fights with Evander Holyfield. And of course, in the middle, as I said, had an unexpected life and death fight with Burt Cooper. But that came after Mike Tyson faked the rib injury to wind up in prison. Story of that one, of course, was Holyfield got the early knockdown. Cooper nearly knocked him out in the third round. They were trading blows until Holyfield wins on an 8th round stoppage. And so after all that takes place, people are wondering, when will Evander Holyfield step up against some of the young gun heavyweights like Riddick Bowe, Ray Mercer, Michael Moore, and Razor Riddick, who are basically the big four lining up on the contender slot for Evander Holyfield's title. Step forward to this progress was a fighter from Brooklyn, New York, the same hometown of Mike Tyson, none other than Riddick Bowe, 1988 Olympic silver medalist, known for basically just getting bum rushed by Lennox Lewis in the gold medal fight. And we talk about what he came after that career. The story on him was a guy who was just lethargic and who basically just tried to get on sheer talent, which he had a lot of it, but never had the desire or the work ethic to get to that point. And that's what cost him the gold medal round against Lennox Lewis. And that's why he went up with the silver. But he turned pro, brought up a little bit more carefully than Evander Holyfield did. And then in 1992, won two significant title eliminator fights against Everett Bigfoot Martin and Pierre Kutzer to wind up the number one contender for Evander Holyfield's titles. And that's how we had the first fight. Now, prior to the first fight, 2 weeks before it, it was Lennox Lewis upsetting Donovan Razor Riddick to win another title eliminator, which prompted him to fight the winner of the first Holyfield-Bowe fight. So lots of craziness in the heavyweight division. When you talk about what took going to this first fight, their first fight, the question was, the first time Evander Holyfield fought a serious challenger to his heavyweight championship, a younger fighter, and the feeling was the title was going to change hands some way, somehow. Either Riddick Bowe was going to become the undisputed champion, or Evander Holyfield was going to retain his title, but gain the respect because he took on a young, hungry lion who was coming in ready to take his championship. And the last minute odds, it was back and forth, but last minute odds went to Riddick Bowe due to his size and youth. So people wonder where Evander Holyfield could even mess with a guy 6'5", 235, because that's what Riddick Bowe was going into that first fight. We talk about what took place in the first fight of November of 1992. The original strategy was for Evander Holyfield to use Riddick Bowe's size as a handicap, whether as a strength. In the first round and a half, he did just that. But a low blow to the area where Evander Holyfield can't have babies from Riddick Bowe, and now they're trading punches all over the place. And Evander Holyfield, later on by his own admission, basically said, after he got dirty with me, I wanted to knock him out. So he turned it on, went toe-to-toe for the rest of that second round in a firefight, which many thought would be to the detriment of Evander Holyfield, simply because he was messing with a bigger guy. But here he was coming on, mixing it up with a bigger heavyweight, rounds 2, 3, and 4. Ferocious exchanges between both fighters. And looked like for a minute, Holyfield was actually going to have his own, because Riddick Bowe had phases where he stopped punching. So we fast forward into round 5, where Holyfield really starts to turn it up, and it looked like there he was going to get the knockout. But from round 6 through 9, Riddick Bowe's size took over. It was led to probably the greatest heavyweight championship round of the 90s. Round 10 of the first Bowe Holyfield fight, the uppercut by Riddick Bowe, which lifted Evander Holyfield to his tippy toes. If he put any more weight, Holyfield would have gone through the Mirage in Las Vegas. And Evander Holyfield is hanging on for dear life, just basically holding on, covering up. And here's Riddick Bowe swinging away. Looked like Riddick Bowe was going to get the knockout, but a cagey move by Evander Holyfield to keep his hands up, stay along the ropes, smother Riddick Bowe's size, and allowed Riddick Bowe to punch himself out. And it looked like Evander Holyfield was going to be knocked out. That's the first half of round 10. Let's go to the second half of round 10. And now, fasten your seatbelts, because here comes a roller coaster. Because out of nowhere, Evander Holyfield, just knowing he needs a knockout to win, because he started far behind on the scorecards, started to load up with uppercuts, hooks, right hands, and now Riddick Bowe was there to be hit. And that it looked like for a minute, Evander Holyfield was going to turn the tide and win the stoppage, because that round was going on. Riddick Bowe was gassed. Holyfield was fighting at home for the uppercut and the overhand right. Riddick Bowe was hanging on. And with 20 seconds left in the round, a 3-punch combination and then another uppercut, and Riddick Bowe was hurt again. For 1 minute, it looked like Evander Holyfield was going to get knocked out. Then we fast forward to the second half of the round. Holyfield gains some momentum, puts together a combination, has Riddick Bowe hurt, but the bell saved Riddick Bowe as Evander Holyfield started to gain momentum. And that's where Holyfield said years later, my gosh, if there was only 20 more seconds, I would have had him. Because he had Riddick Bowe going at the end of that 10th round. But the fast forward to round 11, did 2 uppercuts by Bowe, put Holyfield on his knees. Holyfield did win the 12th round, but it wasn't enough, as Riddick Bowe, who won the first of their 3 fights by a unanimous decision, to win the heavyweight championship. Evander Holyfield basically conceded defeat, pointed the finger at Riddick Bowe, and said, he won it the right way. He took it from me. And that first fight between Bowe and Holyfield, it was a perfect case of win-win. For Riddick Bowe, silenced a lot of critics because many thought he couldn't get himself in the kind of shape to win a heavyweight championship, and he answered a lot of those critics, becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And for Evander Holyfield, for a guy after having a lethargic performance against Larry Holmes 4 months before, showed why he was considered the warrior. He'd been known as the warrior, and we showed exactly why he could hang with the big boys, even defeat, gracious in defeat, but still won a lot of the skeptics, especially in that 10th round, where he took everything Riddick Bowe had to offer, was still upright, and almost had Riddick Bowe going. So the first fight, Riddick Bowe was the official winner. But in the case of both fighters won, we talk about what the stock up when it comes to the both fighters before, during, and after that first fight in 1992. So we conclude the first of that trilogy. That was November 13th, 1992. And I'm telling you, if you want to watch a Rock'em Sock'em fight, watch that first fight because that's what it was. Now to the fun part before we get to the second fight. After that fight, Riddick Bowe was announced a winner, but his mandatory challenger was none other than Lennox Lewis, who 2 weeks before obliterated Razor Ruddock to become the challenger for the winner of that fight. And Riddick Bowe sees Lennox Lewis at ringside, who did the pay-per-view version of the commentary for that fight, tells Lennox Lewis to his face, "Bring it on. I'm not afraid of you." Lennox Lewis points to him to his face. "You bring it on. I will knock you out." Because that's what he told him when he beat him in the 88 Olympics to win the gold medal. He said the same thing there. So that fight had to be made next. But 3 weeks after this, a flight took a trip with Riddick Bowe and his controversial theatrical manager, Rock Newman, went from Washington, D.C., where Riddick Bowe resided, to the other side of London, England, the backyard of Lennox Lewis, takes the championship belt, throws it in the garbage can, basically ducks Lennox Lewis as if to say, "We're not going to have this fight anytime soon." And it had to be made because basically everybody said that's the next opponent for Riddick Bowe, or you're going to have to vacate the belts. And that's what happened with that situation. While that's going on, after his loss to Riddick Bowe in the first fight, Evander Holyfield contemplated retirement at the time before he had an early comeback early in 1993 against Alex Stewart, a guy he beat before, won on a unanimous decision, which didn't win the crowd over. But the story from the Holyfield angle was he let go of his longtime trainers, George Benton and Lou Duva, brings in the well-respected Emmanuel Stewart, known at the time for training the great Thomas Hearns, and he was the one that trained Holyfield for the first fight, to be the second fight against Alex Stewart, which was his first after the Riddick Bowe defeat. And after that, all that took place, Riddick Bowe decides to have a homecoming fight and a meaningless title defense against a woefully ill-fated Michael Dokes in a fight that had no business taking place. And Riddick Bowe gets a first-round knockout in a senseless fight that was just a waste of everybody's time, as a way to say, I'd rather fight this guy than fight Lennox Lewis, who was the mandatory challenger. Then, basically, if you put it in this hindsight, Riddick Bowe and Rock Newman ducked Lennox Lewis to fight a 38-year-old Michael Dokes, who basically was past it. It basically was a shell of himself after Razor Ruddock clocked him 3.5 years before that. And some way, somehow, Michael Dokes gets a title shot. Boxing, I tell you. But he gets that, and everyone's still clamoring for a Riddick Bowe Lennox Lewis fight, wondering if that's ever going to take place. While that's going on, Evander Holyfield's working with Emmanuel Stewart. It's trying to get a strategy to try and get the rematch with Riddick Bowe. And after Bowe had a successful second title defense, another nonsensical one against Jesse Ferguson, which made no sense, we finally got the rematch of November 6, 1993, the second encounter between Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield. This is despite all attempts of Riddick Bowe to avoid Lennox Lewis. This is despite Michael Moore coming up in the rankings. And in the middle of that, Tommy Morrison got knocked out by Michael Bitt. And so he was knocked out of the picture. The story with that's going into this rematch, and this is where we start to see the theatrics and the bad habits of Riddick Bowe. He won the title, went on a Ollie-like trip to across the globe to parts of the country, to parts of the world, so Newman could try and market this guy like a Muhammad Ali type figure, which didn't work because on top of that, Riddick Bowe had his hardly even trained, ballooned his weight 12 pounds heavier than he did in the first fight, and when he went into that ring for this rematch, his body was far from what it was when he won the title the first time. Where Evander Holyfield put on 12 pounds of muscle and was determined to regain the championship he lost to Riddick Bowe the year before. So we fast forward to this rematch. The first punch Riddick Bowe throws that hurts Evander Holyfield was the overhand right, the same one that hurt him in the first fight. But this time, Evander Holyfield weathers the storm and goes back to what he was supposed to do in the first fight, which is what the Emmanuel Stewart was brought in for, to keep Evander Holyfield disciplined as a way to use Riddick Bowe's extra weight as a handicap as opposed to a strength. And that's what Holyfield started to do. Fast forward to the end of the fourth round of the second fight. And the common theme, which has been the first fight, same thing carries over here. Action at the end of the round, action after the round. And both guys were just swinging away. We're both respective trainers. Emmanuel Stewart for Evander Holyfield, Eddie Futch for Riddick Bowe, had to separate the fighters. But the thing is, a sneaky right hand just before the bell center by Evander Holyfield opened a cut over the right eyelid of Riddick Bowe, and that's a bad place to have a cut. So we have all of that. Looks like we're going to have another wild scene between the two fighters, because when they go, and that they're about to have one of those things like they did in the first fight. But 40 seconds left in the fifth round, maybe a bit of an earth shaker, and a golden opportunity was almost blown. The perfectly placed 1-2 by Evander Holyfield, and Riddick Bowe's doing the jelly dance for a guy 247 pounds around the ring, because now he's hurt, but Evander Holyfield is afraid to throw more punches. That was a problem, because he had him hurt. He could have had him knocked out. But Evander Holyfield said later, I was zoned into just box the guy, not to go after him, because he didn't want to open himself up to one of those Bowe uppercuts, understandably so. But Holyfield gained all the momentum as the fifth round ended after that rally in the last 40 seconds, stole round 5. Actually won that one big. You could say it was a 2-point round because how he hurt Riddick Bowe. And in the sixth round, it was a carryover from the fifth. Holyfield had the edge, doing what he wanted to do in the first fight. Emmanuel Stewart had Evander Holyfield doing it in the rematch in combinations, get out, not allowing Riddick Bowe to use his weight or use his jab or get off the uppercut that he was successful with in their first fight. And now Holyfield looks like he gains control. But round 7, that's why we call it boxing. And the fight, for the fight followers watching, you know what happened here. As Evander Holyfield starts to gain control, he pulls back a foot. I mean, jumps a whole back a foot from Riddick Bowe, tilts his head up in the sky, and Riddick Bowe turns away. And next thing you know, there's James Miller, a.k.a. Fan Man, with a parachute hanging on the top rope. And how they got there is another story. But yes, the parachutist on the top rope in the middle of the fight at the outdoor pavilion of Caesar's Palace, hanging there, the parachute hanging on the top of the lights across the Caesar's Palace and TVKO banners up there. And as that Fan Man started to find his way into the audience, there's Riddick Bowe's posse, led by James Miller. It used to be James, I can't remember his name, James Edwards or something like that. I can't remember the guy's. No, Jason Harris. Correct. His name was Jason Harris. Beating this Fan Man up with a walkie-talkie and knocking him cold senseless. I mean, there's still the gloomy image of James Miller being knocked cold by Jason Harris, Riddick Bowe's bodyguard, with a walkie-talkie that split in half, and he was out cold like he fell asleep. I mean, he got whacked upside the head after the parachutist came down and landed into the area where Riddick Bowe's training team, Rock Newman and Jason Harris were. And Jason Harris has smashed him with a walkie-talkie right upside his head. In the middle of all that was Riddick Bowe's wife at that time, Judy, who was on the verge of having another pregnancy, who faded in the middle of all of that. Nobody knows why she did. Excitement, who knows? Of course, chaos takes place in the second fight as Riddick Bowe contemplated to simply conceding the fight and to be there with his wife. But he said all along he didn't want to be known as a quitter, so he went through with it. After a 21-minute delay that had this parachutist arrested after being knocked out cold, among many other things, they go back into the fight, picked it up where they left off, and after being behind on the scorecards, Riddick Bowe started to turn up a little bit, put the pressure on. Holyfield slowly went back to the warrior instinct that got him in trouble in the first fight. Almost happened again, except this time, Evander Holyfield is matching Bowe punch for punch. And it concluded in the 12th round, where the last 30 seconds, both fighters were just trading away. And the fight continued 5 seconds after the bell with more exchanges them going at it. Emmanuel Stewart had to tackle Evander Holyfield just to keep him off of him. But this time, it was Evander Holyfield who had his arm raised and won on a majority decision to regain the heavyweight championship. 3 takeaways out of this one. The ability to adjust in a rematch after a loss has always been Evander Holyfield's forte. Showed it again here. He knew the mistake he made in the first fight against Riddick-Bowe. Made the adjustment with the new trainer Emmanuel Stewart, stayed disciplined, and managed to get the decision, and that's why he won the fight. The bad habits and the theatrics that always followed Riddick-Bowe and Rock Newman reared their ugly head here. The laziness of Riddick-Bowe after the world tour, moving up to 247 pounds. And, of course, all the drama with the fan man coming into the camp of Riddick-Bowe, where they just busted out walkie-talkies and crashed the guy so hard the guy fell asleep. I mean, what more can you say about that? But everything that both fighters were the epitome of was on the second fight. Now to the fun stuff before we get to the third fight, because the next year with both of these, lots of chaos and lots of turmoil all over the place. Well, let's start with Evander Holyfield. Won the championship, had to fight Michael Moore, lost it under odd circumstances. Turns out he had health problems with a shoulder, and Dr. Flip Homansky said he noticed breathing problems, among many other things. Holyfield contemplated temporarily retired at the moment. While that one was going on, Riddick-Bowe decides to just stay inactive, not even have any kind of fight for the next 13 months after that. And when he comes back, the guy's still into theatrics. The left-right combination at the press conference that's hit Larry Donald unnecessarily. And after that, the fight against Buster Mathis Jr., where he hits Mathis after he was already down, where he should have been disqualified and was awarded a no contest. And Riddick-Bowe's fights after the 2 against Evander Holyfield started the bad habits were beginning to show for him. Then we go back to Evander Holyfield. As he contemplated retirement, he goes to a supposed faith healer to see what is wrong with his heart, and see if his heart was good or not. So apparently he goes to this faith healer. This guy basically says, your heart is good, you're good to fight, but go to a local commission, get it checked out, and fight again. Dr. Flip Homansky, who saw this faith healer display that was all over the television news, basically said, I'm a guy who reads the medical black and white off of medical reads or whatever. Called Evander Holyfield and looked at his heart and basically said, nothing wrong with you. If you want to fight, we'll grant you a license. It basically turns out the guy was overdosed, overhydrated on whatever the frick they want to put him on. I don't even know what it was. It had a large heart, larger than normal. And so he got the license. And the only fight that was able to be made at that point took place 30 years ago tonight at Caesar's Palace. The conclusion of the trilogy between Riddick-Bowe and Evander Holyfield. Still, the two best heavyweights in the world at that point. The story with this one, after all the lumber both fighters took in the first 2 fights, they took more lumber, and you could probably argue the third fight was probably the most brutal out of the 3 of them. Because when they were hitting each other upside the head, it sounded like they were throwing bricks at one another because you heard bones crack. Again, it's the first round, Evander Holyfield stayed disciplined like he should. But in the second and third rounds, once again, Riddick-Bowe suckered Holyfield into a exchange, which was to Riddick-Bowe's liking. And for the second and third round, looked like Bowe gained control. Early in the fourth round, a couple of uppercuts by Holyfield had Bowe hurt. But after that point, rounds 4 and 5 were some of the most brutal rounds you saw one fighter ever took. Because Riddick-Bowe started to deliver a beating to Evander Holyfield in the 4th and 5th rounds. Basically, the punch stats in those 2 rounds was almost 5.5 to 1 in punches thrown in favor of Riddick-Bowe. That's how one-sided rounds 4 and 5 were. And it looked like the fight was close to being stopped. I mean, the beating was so bad, George Foreman, who called the third Holyfield fight on HBO pay-per-view, was get off his seat, screaming off the top of his lungs for the fight to be stopped because Holyfield had no life and Bowe was just starting to pummel him. But as he was pummeling him, Riddick-Bowe lost his discipline, delivered a low blow that cost him a point, allowed Holyfield to gain his breath for a minute, and the round 5 comes to an end. Looked like we was going to have a stoppage because everyone's asking Evander, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And Holyfield looked like a spent force at the end of round 5. I mean, he was collapsed back in the stool. So he fast forwarded to round 6, and basically almost like a last chance shot for Evander Holyfield. A left hook to the body, a left hook to the chest, and out of nowhere, they trade punches. Holyfield with a sneaky left hook, and down for the first time in his career goes Riddick-Bowe. And Riddick-Bowe is down, barely beats the count. And now we have another shift in momentum of this trilogy, which is filled with shifts in momentum. And looked like Riddick-Bowe was going to be knocked out, but Evander Holyfield just gassed out. I mean, after he had Bowe pinned in the corner, lands a straight right hand through the guard, Holyfield just suddenly gasses out. The only luck I had this time was that Riddick-Bowe was so hurt he couldn't do anything about it. That 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds was the epitome of what this trilogy was. And Holyfield tried to gather something at the end of the 6th round where he just peppered Riddick-Bowe with a left jab to basically win the round and look like he regained momentum again. After just being pummeled like a bad habit in the previous 2 rounds, he floors Bowe, wins the 6th round, and another shift of momentum. Fast forward to round 7, nothing happens either way. But the feeling was whoever turned it up first was going to win this fight, and it's going to end in a knockout because both guys were just gone and just pummeled from all the flush punches those two took in this trilogy because they took a lot of flush shots both ways. And you can probably say the 3rd fight was the most brutal, especially from Evander Holyfield's end, because in rounds 3 through 5, he just got shellacked. So we fast forward to round 8. A quick right hand again stuns Riddick-Bowe. Holyfield goes after him, but runs smack into a right hand and is on his face. Holyfield gets up. 2 more right hands by Riddick-Bowe is on his knee. And the referee, Joe Cortez, waves it off. And in the conclusion of the greatest trilogy since Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, at least in the heavyweight division, Riddick-Bowe wins the series 2-1 and ends the trilogy on an 8th round knockout. A trilogy that had so many twists and turns, so many momentum shifts, so much heart, so much desire, and 2 guys that were perfectly made for one another who delivered the goods in probably the marquee trilogy of the 90s, at least in the heavyweight division. The thing is, I always say with trilogies, we have 2 guys that were made for one another. This is the perfect example of it. And when you have all the shifts and momentum like these 2 guys had, I mean, this is one of those kind of old school theories where had they had one fight and fought 40 to 50 rounds back then, where you only win a fight by knockout, it would have gone 40 to 50 rounds because that's what this trilogy was, back and forth. And when it concluded 30 years ago, it concluded in a manner that basically won the boxing public over. Because remember, at that time, Mike Tyson was still doing what he was doing in prison. George Foreman had won regained the heavyweight title, but had no desire to really defend it because he was 45 years old. And the heavyweight division was in a stopgap, but Riddick-Bowe and Evander Holyfield kept the division going with this epic trilogy, and that concluded 30 years ago. And that was why they were, for at least the first half of the 90s, the premier heavyweights of that decade. And these 2 guys were just absolutely phenomenal. And you would think that after this trilogy, there would be Riddick-Bowe that would come out the better of the 2. That did not happen. Who would the last thing that anyone thought would be Riddick-Bowe will come out the worst of the 2? Because we talk about what happened to him in the 2 fights against Andrew Galata. He got hit so many times below the belt. I'm not sure how the guy even produced any more babies if he ever did. But aside of that, he got walloped. But Evander Holyfield, some way, somehow, galvanizes himself, and a year later, at the MGM Grand, beats the brakes off of Mike Tyson. probably the biggest oddity was how that happened, because everyone was calling for Evander Holyfield's head after this third fight against Riddick-Bowe, where he was just walloped outside of the haymaker left hook that floored Bowe in their third fight, and looking nonchalant against Bobby Chiz 6 months before. And Riddick-Bowe, who basically reached the pedestal of the best heavyweight in the world again, and somehow again his 2 fights against Andrew Golota just fell off the rails. Riddick-Bowe's case might be a scenario of not just the grueling 3 fights with Evander Holyfield, and some of the other fights he had in between where he took some hard punches, especially from guys like Herbie Hyde and Jorge Luis Gonzalez, among a couple. But when you live the way he did, with the yo-yo effects of the abuse you put through your body, up and down 40, 50, 60-pound weight differences, the way Riddick-Bowe did, as his manager Rock Newman said, it'll catch up to you sooner than you think. And that's what happened. The guy got old before he really got old. And that's how he fell off the rails after this trilogy. And I said all about Riddick-Bowe and Rock Newman. They were all about the theatrics. And the theatrics caught up to them in the first fight against Andrew Golota, even though Golota was rightfully disqualified with the low blows. The riot after the fight, the nonsensical riot. And after that, that was all she wrote for Riddick-Bowe and Andrew in that particular fight. And of course, there was a rematch. And in that rematch, Riddick-Bowe got pummeled, but aside of a questionable overhand right to the back of Golota's head that got the 4th round knockdown and ended disqualification, rightfully so. But what happened to Riddick-Bowe after the trilogy was a case of a fighter who couldn't stay disciplined out of the ring. And when your lack of discipline out of the ring is carried inside the ring, it's going to catch up with you. And it catch up with Riddick-Bowe sooner than we thought. Even after the second fight, George Foreman, who called the fight for HBO pay-per-view, said, I know fighters older than Riddick-Bowe who don't look that bad. And Riddick-Bowe looked bad in the 2 fights against Andrew Golota after the trilogy. And he looked bad. And of course, after the second fight, after I guess he went through a neurological screening, it was declared that he should retire, which he did. Oddly tried out the Marines, and that lasted all but a minute. Because if you're going to be lazy in your boxing career, how the hell are you going to get yourself ready for what are we going to be doing in the Marines? I mean, good luck with that. I mean, the fact the guy lasted 3 days was actually a miracle. Riddick-Bowe said the only reason why he did it was because the sergeant was hard on him. What would he expect the guy to do? Coddle you? That's why Riddick-Bowe's career in life after the Holyfield trilogy sank, and it really took down the turn outside the ring with a divorce. Was involved in some kind of interstate commerce. Supposedly, he kidnapped the kids from his ex-wife after a divorce. Wound up in prison for 18 months. Came out, had a mini comeback, which went to nowhere. Not too long ago, tried Muay Thai boxing, which I don't know what that was all about. And basically, that was it. Riddick-Bowe's case of a fighter. We say all heavyweights. A lot of fighters also, and a lot of athletes. If it takes extra discipline to get to the top, and even more extra discipline to stay at the top. Once Riddick-Bowe got to the top, everything caught up. He basically said that was it, and the bad habits caught up. That's why, at the end, more than likely why they threw the belt in the garbage can in 1992 to duck Lennox Lewis. Because even Eddie Fletcher's trainer saw that coming from a mile away. Basically saying, I ain't putting him in there with Lennox Lewis. Going back to their amateur fight in 1988, where Lennox Lewis just walloped him to win the gold medal. That laid into the mind of trainer Emmanuel Stewart. That's how that took place. Excuse me, the trainer Eddie Futch, Riddick-Bowe's trainer. I'm sorry, I got him mixed up with Lennox Lewis. But when it got to that point, Eddie Futch says, I can't put him out there with Lennox Lewis. I don't trust it, because Lennox Lewis wanted Riddick-Bowe badly in the ring as a pro, as he did in the amateur. Because even Lennox Lewis said, I was looking to beat him. I was going to knock him out the way I knocked him out as an amateur. He probably would have done it, because Lennox Lewis had Riddick-Bowe's number. Psychologically, Lennox Lewis knew if he got Riddick-Bowe in the ring, same thing was going to happen to the pros as it did in the amateurs. That's why Riddick-Bowe and Rock Newman went to London and threw the belt in the garbage can to duck that fight, And that's why we never had that fight. And it's something to this day, Riddick-Bowe hears about. Even Evander Holyfield tells him to his face, why did you avoid the fight? Because that's a fight that should have happened in the midst of all the great fights we had in the 90s in the heavyweight division. That was one that should have happened. Evander Holyfield told that to Riddick-Bowe's face not too long ago. That should tell you something right there. From the Evander Holyfield angle, after the third fight, everybody thought he should have been done with. He looked even worse against Bobby Chiz in a fight where basically it was nondescript. His lockout was Bobby Chiz couldn't crack an egg as a heavyweight. Of course, that's a week later. He gets the payday against Mike Tyson. And after that fight, everybody was wondering, can Evander Holyfield last 90 seconds? Not only does this guy last 90 seconds, he lasted more than 90 seconds and gave Mike Tyson a wallop on top of it. In a fight, he was pegged as a 25-1 underdog, and it was dropped to 6-1 because somebody knew something everybody didn't. That's Evander Holyfield. Of course, we know what happened at the rematch where he's about to beat Mike Tyson again. Mike Tyson chickens out with the ear bites, gets himself disqualified on purpose because Holyfield was going to beat him again. And after that, got a revenge win over Michael Moore to essentially clean out that part of the 90s, to call that part of the 90s his era. Because that was his era. He fought anyone and everyone possible. And after getting his revenge on Michael Moore, his legacy was cemented. And you could talk about the Tyson fights, the Moore revenge, the regained world titles to elevate his legacy. But the name, the Warrior, the Noble Warrior, for Evander Holyfield came with these 3 fights with Riddick-Bowe. Now, yes, he did lose to Lennox Lewis at the end of 99, but it was Lennox Lewis's time at that point. Got a nonsensical trilogy with John Ruiz in 2000, but anything after 2000, I just deem irrelevant for Evander Holyfield because everybody knows he really should have been fighting even after he had an inexcusable loss to James Toney and one of the wrap your brain around it type fights that makes you wonder how it happened. But the legacy of Evander Holyfield with the heavyweight division was from beating Buster Douglas all the way to getting the revenge of Michael Moore. Of course, we talk about the legacy standpoint was beating Mike Tyson twice. But as the noblest of warriors, the heart and determination and what made Evander Holyfield tick as the Warrior, it was a trilogy against Riddick-Bowe. The best of Evander Holyfield and the best of Riddick-Bowe, when they went at it, they were made for one another. So many shifts of momentum, so much edge of your seat type drama. And that's what we got when we talk about these two heavyweights who ruled the rules for at least the first half of the 90s. And when they concluded their trilogy 30 years ago tonight at Caesar's Palace, it was the end of probably an all-time great trilogy, easily the greatest trilogy post the Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier trilogy. Of course, there's some others. I'll touch on that here in a second. But it certainly was an era for the ages. And these two warriors basically gave it their all, gave it their best, laid it all on the line when the stakes were the highest. And we talk about their first fight, undefeated champ, undefeated number one challenger, which is something everybody wants. They deliver the goods. And their places in history forever secure. Now we talk about some of the great trilogies, at least in the heavyweight division. Ali Frazier will always be the gold standard. Is, was, and always will be. No other way to sugarcoat it. This was the serious challenger to that throne. And it was a serious challenger because like Ali and Frazier, Evander Holyfield and Riddick-Bowe had shifts of momentum. Both fighters hurt many times in this trilogy. And just like Ali and Frazier, it was for the highest stakes, the heavyweight championship of the world. This one was a serious challenger to that one. And there also was Muhammad Ali and Ken Norton. Every bit as good as Holyfield-Bowe and Ali and Frazier. Not talked about enough, but it was certainly a great one. Floyd Patterson and Ingmar Johansson. Knockdown, drag out, bodies hit the floor. That was a great trilogy. And if you go back to the 4-fight series between Ezra Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott, that's certainly in there. That's what heavyweight trilogies are all about. Two men made for one another, shifts of momentum, laying it all on the line for the ultimate prize, the heavyweight championship of the world. And that's what we had. And it concluded 30 years ago tonight at Caesar's Palace. The greatest heavyweight trilogy post Ali Frazier ended when Evander Holyfield and Riddick-Bowe collided for the third and final time, and it was Riddick-Bowe winning the series 2-1 with an eighth round knockout where he had to come off the canvas to do it. It's basically a fight where Evander Holyfield was basically one or two punches away from just being absolutely flattened out. But somehow he galvanized himself to floor Riddick-Bowe and managed to hurt him again before he was knocked out. A trilogy that had everything: the good, the bad, the pretty, the ugly, the even, the odd, and even the oddities. We talk about Riddick-Bowe and Rock Newman and the Fan Man in the second fight. That's boxing for you. Too bad we don't have any trilogy, anything close to that, at least in the heavyweight division, because that one was a doozy. That one was a doozy. And it deserves its own slot because of what it brought to the sport at a time when the heavyweight division started to get hot and it started to get deep. We talk about Buster Douglas. You talk about, obviously, these two, Holyfield and Bowe, Ray Mercer, Tommy Morrison, Razor Ruddock, Lennox Lewis, even some other heavyweights like a David Tua and Hasim Rahman came along. Ike Ibuchi before he fell off the rails and wound up in prison. Chris Bird. That was when the heavyweight division started to get hot. But the landmark trilogy and the landmark rivalry of the 90s was Evander Holyfield and Riddick-Bowe. They delivered the goods. And the three fights in 92, 93, and 95, if you want to spend about an hour a day watching all three, watch it. Because I watch it as if it happened live. And it never gets old. Especially the first fight, that round 10, where you got to fasten your seatbelts because it looked like Riddick-Bowe had it. Then Evander Holyfield came back and it looked like he had it. That's what heavyweight boxing should be. That's what heavyweight boxing should have always been. Not anything what we see today. Just two colossal fighters made for one another, terrific careers. And you can say a lot of things about both fighters before, during, and after. But when they got in the ring and shared the ring, they shared a lot of memories that last for a long time and will forever last in the mind of the fight fans. It's one of those timeless memories that stick to the mind to the end of time. That's what we had 30 years ago, 3 decades ago with this trilogy. Shout out Evander Holyfield and Riddick-Bowe. Thanks for the memories. And on that note, that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. I will be back to the regular routine tomorrow night. If you missed this episode or any of the other episodes I've had in the past, you can catch them on the Apple Podcasts and the iHeartRadio apps. If you want to watch the video version, you can catch it on the Spotify app. Also coming soon, the Patreon app and many others as the rebranding now starts to begin as 2025 comes to a close. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. Always take care of yourself first before you take care of anything else. Focus on you, take care of you, and good things will happen. If you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else matters. Until then, have a good rest of the night. Enjoy it. Take care of yourselves. God bless. And I will see you tomorrow night.